And we went down there and I looked at this bloke and I said to the fellow, what's the matter with him? Is he drunk? Because this is the middle of the day. And he said, no, he's stoned. And this is in the middle of the day, in a war, and they don't care. They're into the weed, you know, having a great old time. You want some of this, man? I said, no, thanks. There was a saying that was true. The daylight belongs to us, because we had all the superiority. We had all the guns and the bombs and the aeroplanes, and the North Vietnamese, or the Viet Cong if you like, had nothing. But the night time, it was a different kettle of fish. They had the advantage because they worked at night.
What has stopped John Plenty throwing his hands up in the air and saying, to hell with this?
That's easy. Yeah, she's up in the bedroom, a bit crook at the moment. If it wasn't for her, no, not strictly Maria, but if it wasn't for my wife and family, I really think that things might have been terminated some time ago, when the storm clouds were really dark and ugly and all that sort of business. It was my wife and family that pulled me through it, and they still do.
So John, if you could give us that summary that we were talking about, the 5 minutes of your life, that would be fantastic in your own time.
Well, I was born in 1944 in a very small town called Rendlesham, which is down in the southeast of South Australia. Went to primary school there. Then the next closest town with a high school was Millicent, which was about 8 miles away. So I had a bit of a checkered high school career. Was asked to leave, I think, when I was 14 or something. And then through fair means or foul, I ended up in the forces. Was given a choice by a rather friendly old policeman down there who gave me some good advice. Said go and join for 3 years, and I ended up staying there 21 or thereabouts. Went overseas to Malaysia in 1963 and stayed there till 1966. And it was during that time that I met and married my wife in the early part of 1966. Came back to Australia in June 66. Had our first child the following year in 67, and went back to Malaysia again in 1967 for another couple of years. Back home from there in 69, did the usual military type things, posted here, there, everywhere. Was reasonably successful, I think, and was discharged from the army in 1983, and then served with the Department of Veterans Affairs for another 11 years, and finally retired and packed it in, stopped working in about 1994, 94. 3 children, all married, all successful in their own way.
Can you tell me about joining? What you had to do to join, and what your early experiences of army life were? Sure.
You have to go through a fairly rigid medical examination, and I actually failed the first one, and I'm not sure why. I think it was something to do with blood sugar or something like that. That doesn't matter. But 12 months later, they asked me to come back, and 12 months later I was successfully said fine, you know. So we went and did all that, and I enlisted in Adelaide at Keswick Barracks. Spent a few days there, just waiting until they had a group big enough to put on the train to send over to a place called Wagga, which I'm sure you know about. That's where the recruit training battalion still is. So off we went in the middle of winter to, oh my God, was it cold. And we did, I think, about 3 months there. And they completely change your culture. They strip you down, they take everything away, and they turn you into what they want you to be, and that is a soldier, to do what they want you to do when they want you to do it. And that's what it was. Wow. I mean, I had a bit of a mouth back in those days. I think we called it a 2-bob-a-leer. And I got punched in the mouth about 4 or 5 times, and I said, you better learn to shut up, because otherwise it's going to be a rough 2 or 3 years for you. So I did, and you learn. And it was pretty, I wasn't very physically endowed, but I had a lot of endurance, and I got through that quite easily, and I enjoyed it. You know, you've got to be here at a certain time and get up and do this, that and the other. But one of the old fellows that influenced me the most was an old artillery sergeant, and he was one of our instructors there, And it's because of him that I ended up in the artillery. I used to listen to his stories and all that sort of business. So it was a good 3 months. Very demanding. You learn how to dress and do this and do all sorts of things. And I mean, we turned out pretty smart. Even in your civilian life, there is always some sort of, even now there's still some sort of military, you know, I won't go out unless I look reasonable, what I think is reasonable. So yeah, it didn't hurt me at all.
So you'd had 3 months there where they'd beaten you down and built you back up as a soldier.
Yep.
And did you have leave at that point?
We did. I went to Melbourne with some friends there. Just a big, stupid country kid that didn't know anything, and I think I had about 2 or 3 beers and fell over or something. And we're only there for a few days, and then I don't really remember much about it. And we just stayed with his family and didn't do anything special. Probably went to the movies and thought we were, you know, God's gift to all the pretty girls around the place, but nothing exciting in Melbourne.
And then back to Wagga?
Back to Wagga to finish it off. I think probably the leave was about midway through, and then we went back and completed our recruit training, and then off to, God help us, we went off to corps training. And if I thought recruit training was bad, I had a big shock coming, I'll tell you. So we...
What was the difference?
Oh, the discipline required in the corps was far and away worse than what was required at Wagga. The artillery had the reputation of being the discipline corps, and I began to find out what it was in a hurry, I tell you. We some of the things they used to make you do there.
And you'd chosen the artillery, or had you been assigned to the artillery?
I was assigned, but I'm glad. What they would do was look at who needed what, which part of the army needed soldiers. And I was very, very lucky that I got the artillery. I originally put in to go to the Armoured Corps, and I'm glad that I never got it, because confined spaces don't do a lot for me. So I'm really pleased that I got the artillery. That was something that turned out really well for me.
Why did you put your name down for the Armoured Corps?
They looked at, they give you an indication of who needs what. And I said, oh, the Armoured Corps' a bit short, maybe I'll do the right thing and go to them. But I didn't have any final say. Maybe they didn't think I was suitable for the Armoured Corps, so they put me in artillery. And that's, no argument, no problems at all. That's turned out really good for me.
Once you finished your training, your corps training, what's next?
You get sent to a regular army unit. And I originally started out with air defence, anti-aircraft, what they used to call them, bird gunners. And I went to this particular unit. I was only there 6 months, and then they asked for people to join a particular unit, which was another branch of the artillery. You've got air defence, and this one was what they call field artillery. And they were going to Malaya. And I got no idea where Malaya is, but it sounds good to me, so I'm in, and I put my name down. And I joined the field artillery and had to relearn everything again. All the guns were different, but that didn't matter. And away I went. So it was just one of those things.
So you signed up for Malaya, had no idea where it was.
Yeah.
What was going through your head? Adventure? Was it?
Yeah, where is it? Oh no, I'll have a go. And that was the attitude, you know, I'll have a go at that. That doesn't bother me too much. And away we went. And there are funny things that stick in your mind. And we were at Holsworthy, which is in Sydney. And about 4 or 5 days before we were due to go overseas, I went into one of the local department stores and I got myself on credit. I got myself some really nice clothes. Oh, nothing but the best. And I shot through 4 days later and never paid them a cracker. And I wasn't the only one. A lot of people did that. But we went over there with the best clothes you've ever seen in your life. So that was a bit of skullduggery, but what the hell, it was harmless.
So what sort of guns, you mentioned that you'd swapped guns and had new guns to learn.
Yep.
What guns were you being prepared for Malaya?
for Malaya. They were field artillery pieces. They're actually, the particular one that we used was what they called a pack howitzer. And it could be stripped down into small pieces that could be carried around by a couple of blokes or by mules. They're quite ingenious. Terrible little things as far as knocking the skin off here, and I've seen people lose fingers because when you're putting it back together and all that sort of business. But they're quite ingenious the way they were designed, but not very robust. Didn't sort of stand up to the hard firing too much.
And what was your position on the gun?
You actually start off as the bottom man, just as an ammunition. You just load the thing. You prepare all the ammunition and you load it, and that's what you do. Then as you become better qualified or better at your job, or the sergeant in charge of you thinks that you've got, you know, a couple of bobs worth, he will train you to do other jobs on the gun. You become proficient with one, but if something happens, you can go and do any of those jobs. With a minimum of training, you can go and take over another job with probably about 10 or 15 minutes training. And that was the basis of the Australian Army then. I don't know whether it is now, but you had to be proficient in one job and capable in at least one other. So that's the way it was.
So you were well trained, but you didn't know really much at all about where you were being sent and why?
No. We knew why. We were going over there to become part of a Commonwealth force, which included New Zealand and Britain, because Malaya at the time was developing, and we knew that they'd had trouble with the communists there, and that was largely why this group of Commonwealth forces existed and was maintained. So we were going to become part of that. But we didn't know what was going to evolve in the future.
So at this stage, troops were also being sent to Vietnam?
Yes, they were, yeah, at 1962, so we had a double commitment.
So you head off for Malaya. How did you travel there?
We were taken over first class, no, not first class, we were taken over in a 707. None of this military transport stuff. They took us over in economy class on a Qantas 707. So that was pretty good. All paid for, all free.
Is that because of, why was that? That
was because they really didn't want to antagonise anybody by taking military aircraft there all the time, and people would say in Southeast Asia, they're building up here to do something. So it was all part of the disguise, I think. Of sort, yes, we've got troops there, but you know, not a lot. So we just take them on civilian aircraft. We weren't even in uniform. We were travelling in civilian clothes.
So you headed then from Singapore to Malacca, and you arrive in Malacca. What do you see there?
Just a barren airfield in the middle of what had been cleared out from some rubber trees, basically.
Were the troops welcomed in that?
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. Because they had just got over the trouble with the communist terrorists from the emergency. So they still looked on that as being their security blanket, I think, where they knew that as long as there were Commonwealth troops there, they were going to be pretty safe.
Safe from whom?
Well, safe from communists. You know, that was the big thing. Communism was what they were all scared about. And as long as we were there, they were safe.
What did communism mean to them?
I don't think it really got a chance to flourish in Malaysia, so what it meant to them, I don't know. It was sort of knocked on the head pretty severely before it even got going, although during the emergency it was pretty nasty.
You call it an emergency. Was that a battle or a...
Yes, it was. This was before my time, but because of the trouble they had with the communist terrorists, they were, and this is what influenced old Menzies, you know, the domino theory. They were coming down through Southeast Asia and so forth, and that supposedly is the reason we wound up in Vietnam as well, because of the communist threat right throughout Southeast Asia. And that was why the British troops were maintained there, to get rid of the communists. I think they did it pretty well. It's now one of the most stable countries in Southeast Asia.
And what happened during that incident that was before your time?
The emergency? Well, essentially the communists were trying to destabilise the government to stop Malaysia going towards its independence, which was coming through and being granted from Britain. And they wanted to disrupt all that, and probably their long-term aim was to put in a communist government.
When you originally arrived there, what did you imagine you were going to have to do? Were you imagining you were almost like a peacekeeping force, or...?
Yeah, that's a fair comment. We were just going there. We were going to be over there part of the British Army, the Commonwealth not occupation forces, security forces, if you like, and we would just do what we do from day to day. And pretty much that's what we did until the Indonesian thing started to come up.
And so as soon as that started, how did your orders change? What happened?
It became a little bit more serious. Now, in the terms of wars, this was a small one, but we started to get the feeling that things were probably a bit more serious, and even to such extent that my wife and child lived outside the camp. But I know that there were contingency plans that if things got really bad, to bring everyone inside the camp, because the camp was huge and it could be self-contained. You know, it had its own water supply, sewerage, hospital and so on. And there were plans that if it should get to that stage, then that would occur. And where all of a sudden we might be sitting there on an afternoon, on Saturday to Sunday afternoon having a beer, they would say, don't, this weekend you can expect something unusual perhaps. And they would have what they call a mobilisation exercise, where if things got nasty, they would need to call everybody in at short notice, and that's what they would do. They would just come around and bip, bip, and you had to be ready to go all the time.
So the first bit of action you saw was the Indonesians on the coast. Can you tell me about that?
No, it was in Borneo. That was the first bit that I saw. We won't go into the details, but just let me tell you that I have seen the damage that a hand grenade can do to a human being, and it's not a hell of a lot of fun. I suppose that's probably enough, because you've heard it all before anyway, and it doesn't really change. Some people dress it up, make it sound worse than it is. Basically, that was my, during Malaysia, Borneo, that was my worst experience.
So when did you go to Borneo?
I was there in 1965 along with a lot of other people. What did we go in May, I think? I did write it down somewhere. April to August in 1965. And like we said, small wars, big wars. When it's a war, it's all the same. Although they just called it a confrontation for whatever reason we spoke about, when somebody's shooting back at you, then to my mind, with military uniforms on, it's probably a war. So.
Do you remember the first time you had to pick up, because you were doing small arms, weren't you, down there? Do you remember the first time you had to pick up your gun and actually use it?
You mean a rifle, as in trying to shoot at somebody? No, I can't say that I did. We were predominantly artillery, and we would use those for our own defence wherever possible, but of course the small arms one. I never actually had to fire a small arms, a rifle at anyone to try to kill them, never. And I'm pretty pleased about that.
So what were your experiences in Borneo?
We were in a really unusual situation. An artillery unit consists of 6 guns, and they are normally put on the ground together within about 120 metres, so they're all there. In Borneo, they were spread out over about 60 miles. So you had a single gun every so often along the border, which was very unusual. Not so that they were out of range, so that one gun could always turn around and help out the other one, but that's the way it was, and it was a bit of an unusual situation.
Were they doing that so that you could cover a greater...
Absolutely, yeah. Were actually, the gun that I was with was helping out a British parachute battalion. They just happened to be the people that we were allocated to. If they got in trouble when they were out walking around doing their patrols through the jungle, then they would call for this gun to help them out. And that's the way it was. A bit unusual, but that's the way it was.
And you were called on?
Yes, we were. I don't remember the specifics of exactly what or why, but we were, and we fired a number of rounds. It's all recorded somewhere, and I'm not too bothered with all that sort of stuff. But yes, we were called on.
And this, which kind of gun were you using?
We were then using the one I spoke about before, the pack howitzer, what we termed the Meccano set, the one that you could pull to pieces.
And how was that bearing up in actual use in the field?
It was okay there because we weren't, during that 6 months in Borneo, were never called upon to fire for prolonged periods of time, and I mean maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 hours at a time. It would last maybe an hour, but it could be a bit spasmodic. You know, you'd do a couple of rounds and then rest, and then they would make some adjustments, and away you go again. So the gun was all right for that. But when they took it to Vietnam, it was useless because it was required then to fire huge amounts of ammunition for long periods of time. It literally fell to pieces. It wasn't strong enough.
So during this period of time, what position did you have on the gun in Borneo?
I was a number 3, which was responsible for putting the sighting information on and all that sort of business. And when I was told to do so, you'd fire the thing.
Did you have a signalman with you?
Yes, we did. Actually, I think on that, although we only had one gun, I think there was 10 people there, bearing in mind that you have to do that for 24 hours a day. So you need people to rest and just do that. So 10 or 12 people was, I don't recall the exact number.
And where were you sleeping?
Ah, that's interesting. I knew you'd get round to that sooner or later. We were sent to a place where there was absolutely nothing. When we put the gun on the ground, we had to clear it all. So you could get the thing to fire where it needed to. And we were sleeping above the ground. So what we do, and we became rabbits, and we started digging like hell. And we dug our own sleeping bunkers, which were, one of the bunkers that we slept in was probably about twice the size of this area that we're in here.
Dugouts did you have to make? Did you need them for?
Well, we had to, the first thing that your number 1 priority was the gun. So we had to get that into a pit. So we dig that down and do all that and get the gun into position first, because that had to be protected. That was your number 1 priority. And of course, while you're doing this, you're filling sandbags and doing all that sort of, you know, brickwork, if you like. Then it was the personnel, and I'm not sure, personnel or ammunition, but either one of those two came next, and I don't remember which one. So you had to dig an ammunition bunker, which was quite huge, and then places for people to sleep, and the gun and all that sort of business. So it took a while. We probably only just got it completely finished in about 5, 6 months before it was time for us to go, and we didn't even have time to sit back and admire our handiwork. And then some of the POMs came in and took our place, and we came home.
Did you keep your artillery supplies, your ammunition, all in one place, or did you have to split that up?
No, that was spread around. Because you weren't allowed to keep certain types of ammunition together, we had to have different bunkers, or at least a big bunker with a dividing wall in it or something like that, so that you kept different types of ammunition separate from the others. For safety reasons, but also so that you knew where it was. If you needed to go and get a particular type of ammunition, you knew where it was.
And was that quite away from the sleeping quarters?
No, that was from the gun. Everybody slept around the gun. And I mean, if you looked at my house, for example, the gun and all its sleeping quarters wouldn't cover an area much bigger than my house. Not the block, but the house. So you all had little wings off the gun pit, and that's where you dug and slept in there. So you were adjacent to the gun. You had to be. So you'd get out and get onto the thing at the shortest possible time.
Did you have stretchers or something to sleep on?
We had stretchers, yeah. We were living in luxury. We had stretchers for a change, as opposed to blow-up mattresses, which didn't work too well. The ants used to love them. They used to chew holes in them. So that was a little luxury that we had.
Did you have any POWs?
No, none at all. None at our position. They did get some, but none that I ever saw.
So you were interacting with the villagers on a helpful basis. Mm-hmm. Did you during that 6 months have any days off that you were?
No, none at all. Not a single day off. You were on that hill for 6 or 5.5 months or whatever it was. And that's it.
So not one day off for 6 months?
Not one day off, no.
So when did you find out you were leaving Borneo?
Well, probably only a few days before we went. Everything happened quite quickly. You know, you'd be there, right? You got 4 days to go and whatever, or maybe tomorrow. Because you're packed up with, nobody had anything other than their basic military stuff, which you could put in your pack and be gone in about an hour. I don't really remember exactly how long we were given, but we were gone, basically. Just pack up and go. A helicopter come in and lifted everything out and away it went.
And then where were you taken? Back to Malacca?
We came back to Malacca, yeah, and no, sorry. When we came out of the jungle originally, we came to a place called Kuching, which is in Borneo, an absolutely beautiful place. It was then, and it still is now. That's where all the army headquarters was, at Kuching, because the officers don't want to go out in the scrub. The old generals, they're sitting back there having a good time. So we went back there for a little while, just a few days, and then they took us back by sea on one of those ships that land all the, I forget what they call them, that's a Navy thing.
And how long did that last for? How long were you in Malacca?
Let me see. I never left Malacca until 1966. I think those beach patrols and sentry posts started to dwindle down towards the end of probably 1965 because it had all gone quiet, so they didn't see the reason. There was no more threat, I think, from Indonesia. They'd sort of played their silly little games and didn't come off too well, so it all dwindled out. And then we settled into basically a more military type day. Get up and do your training and have a beer and go to bed. And in the meantime, I met this beautiful little girl in one of the restaurants and went in and ordered some fried rice from her, which I was going to have for my evening meal, and I didn't come back and pick it up, and she abused me, but I ended up marrying her anyway. It's just one of those things.
You were working with the SAS, weren't you? I mean, as in you were liaising with them in, was it
No,
Borneo?
we were with the British Parachute Regiment. We had our own SAS was there. In fact, I think that is probably one of the very first times that our own Australian SAS was involved in anything to do with war. That might have been their grounding or their birthplace, if you like. But I'm not getting mixed up in that. The SAS blokes will kill me if I get this wrong. But let's see. Yeah, the British Parachute Battalion was the people that we were with.
So you had no dealings with the Australian SAS in Borneo?
None at all.
They were quite separate, were they?
Yeah, I don't even know who supported them. I've no idea. And
just getting back to when you were talking about the trenches that you were living in, that period where you didn't have leave for 6 months. The night of the monsoon that came in, can you talk about that a bit more? Because it would be hard for a lot of people to imagine what that was like.
Yeah, if you imagine the darkest night that you can imagine, you cannot see your hand in front of your face. And the monsoon's regular, and down it came. And we were in there, and I don't know, for whatever reason, whether we were concerned that we were under the ground and we knew the amount of water that could come around, and all of a sudden we could hear this noise, and it was plop, plop, and we hadn't quite finished the thing, and the stretchers were up on logs so that we weren't in the mud, and we could hear this plop, and I thought, oh my God, so we got a torch, and there you could see the bits of water, and coming down. And you put 2 and 2 together, and there was 4 of us in there, in the most expletive terms, we're out of here, So we got out.
But how could you see which way to go?
We had a torch, and we knew where the door was, so we up the stairs and out of the thing, and then we realised that our first attempt at plumbing wasn't very good at all. So we had it did us a favour. It showed us where the lowest point of the room was. So then we had to dig a drainage point there because it was going to happen again. There's no doubt about that. So terrifying at the time, let me tell you. I thought that this thing's going to cave in on top of me. And I was getting out of there quick smart.
Did it cave in?
No, it didn't. No, what we'd done through fair means or foul or stupidity or ignorance, where the walls were, instead of sitting the logs just on the edge, we had them about 3 feet out. So once again, it was a case of overkill, and it would need to wash in a lot of dirt before the roof actually came down. So we got lucky. We got lucky.
So all this time, the Vietnam War is going on. What had you heard of it while you were in Borneo and in Malacca?
Nothing. For us, we knew it was on, but I knew very little about it. I was too busy dealing with what we were doing. And the second time around, from 67 to 69, I was too busy having a good time with my wife and family. And I couldn't care less. I knew where it was now because it was part of Southeast Asia. And we'd had a look at it on the map and said, oh, it's not too far away. But it all came as a bit of a culture shock when we got home and the holiday ended, I can tell you that.
What happened?
What did they do? We were next to go. So the 67, 69 two-year holiday became 9 months out in the scrub training to see your wife for 3 months out of that 12 months, and then you're gone for 12 months. So almost 2 years where you don't see your wife and family. And that was a requirement. We were even better trained to go to Vietnam than we were to Malaysia because we had better equipment. And
so when you came home, were you suddenly aware of the strength of feeling about Vietnam?
we were warned before we came home that we were the next to go. We'd been given that. So over the last 6 months of our training in Malaysia, which was the tropics, which we were going to, we adapted that to train the way that we were going to have to fight in Vietnam. In total, we just completely switched. The way in Vietnam we didn't dig holes. You were given a piece of steel and you put it and slept under that because it was wet. And I believe the water table wasn't very far under the ground in a lot of places. So you had to completely change. And I thought it'd become, all of a sudden, become quite easy. Because you didn't have to dig these flaming holes anymore. So that's the way I looked at it, and I reckon this was great. I used to chuckle my head off.
So you arrived back in Townsville, and what else was a shock to you coming back to Australia at that time?
A shock.
Or a surprise?
1969, nothing that stands out. But just seeing what you see and think, good God, you know, but you do what you have to do because being a regular soldier, pardon me, I've got your problem, you do what you do. But we did start to ask questions, I must say.
You did start to ask?
Oh yeah, you say, what, you know, I mean, you see children on there that had been killed and they'd been used in ambushes by the North Vietnamese, and you think, what's going on here? What are we going across there to do this? Against, you know, maybe against some kids and all this sort of business? And then that's when the protesters started calling you so-and-so baby killers, and on it went from there. Well, then we got out of it and did it, but when you come back and they bring you into the airport in the middle of the night and sneak you out the back doors to keep you away from the protesters, then you begin to realise. But then when you're confronted with it on the street, particularly in Townsville, where you would wear your uniform just to go, oh, I've got a nick out at lunchtime, and you know, you cop a few smart remarks. Well, you couldn't really do much about it because any judge at the time would respect the people and he'd shove you in jail, or he'd sort of, you know, and that got pretty nasty. And then the results of that are, why the hell were we there in the first place? And the questions, they're on and on, endless questions.
And then your 2 years was up and back home, and you had known for 6 months out of those 2 years towards the end that you were going to Vietnam. Yep. Is that right? Mm-hmm. What did you have to do when you got back to Australia to prepare for Vietnam?
We started the training cycle again in an intensity that I'd never seen before. We knew that where we were going, this wasn't a joke. This wasn't a small war. This was a fair dinkum one. It had been going for what, 6, 7, 8 years then. So we knew that this was pretty fair dinkum stuff, and we were trained accordingly. And I'll tell you what, when we left here, we were super fit and very, very good at what we were doing, and so were previous Australian troops that went over there as well. It wasn't a game. Were
you still training on the Howitzer gun?
Yeah, yes, but a different type. I mentioned before that little thing wouldn't stand the constant bombardment of artillery requirements. Well, we changed to a Canadian gun, which was called pardon me, an M2A2 it was called. It was made in Canada. And you believe they're still using it today? that's how good it was then, and it was supposed to become obsolete a little while ago, but they've extended its life. But it was quite good. It was a lot heavier, a lot more robust, and you could actually fire the thing indefinitely and it would never break down. It just kept going.
It wasn't dismantleable? It wasn't?
No, it wasn't. It was either you'd move it around with a vehicle or lift it with a helicopter, and away it would go. But very good piece of equipment.
And how many men on that gun? Exactly
the same, 7. It was the same calibre, fired exactly the same ammunition, just was operated a bit differently, that's all.
When were you promoted?
Oh dear. I came back from Malaysia in 1969. I'd say just before I left Malaysia, I think. Or certainly very soon after we got home, I was promoted to sergeant, and then had my own gun.
And so you were training on this gun with other blokes, and you said this level of intensity of training was greater than previously. Can you tell us how that would be? Because to me it all seems like, it sounds what you were talking about before, like it was very intense previously.
Yeah, it was. But a lot of it can depend on how hard and how far your commander wants to push you, or how far he thinks you need to be pushed to get the job done, to be as good as he wants you to be. Some have greater levels of expectations, and so forth. Others don't. I think this fella was probably a little bit more intense than some of the others, but we were required to do a lot more things in Vietnam than we were ever required to do in Malaysia as far as gunnery is concerned. I'm not sure that you'll understand, but in Malaysia, for example, we weren't really required to fire the thing in a complete circle. Right, let me give you a basic example. The bad guys are over there, so you shoot at them there, and all of a sudden they slip around behind you, so you have to turn the thing around and do that. We didn't really have that requirement in Malaysia, but we certainly had it in Vietnam, because they could be anywhere, and you had to be capable of turning that thing around. So that requires some skill, let me tell you, to do that, and it requires a degree of physical fitness, because the damn thing's heavy. It weighs about 2 tonnes.
So 120 guys up there training in what sounds like some intense training. Did you lose men in training? We did lose a few. I think one poor devil broke his arm, so he dropped out and didn't go. The dropout rate was fairly minimal. I don't know what that says, whether they were determined to do the job and hang in there and get it done. Some of them probably shouldn't have went, in all honesty. They weren't perhaps quite as good as they should have been, but we won't mention who, because I'll get a libel suit thrown at me or something. But that's the same with any army unit that you can describe. There's some people there that get through that maybe shouldn't, but they do. And the main reason that they do, I think, is because of the team environment around them. People will help them. If they're finding they're going physically tough, then people in their team will help them get through, and I think that's a good thing. And did you have any national service personnel on your gun? Yes,
I did. I had about half, I think. Out of 7 blokes, I had 3 or perhaps 4, and I had no complaints at all.
What do you remember other than the movement of your gun? Did you have to still keep up with small arms training?
Yes. Every so often you were required to be tested on your skills with that weapon to make sure that you still knew if the thing didn't fire, for example. What the hell am I going to do to fix it and make it go? And you had to maintain your proficiency with that to a certain standard, as well as doing your gunnery. It sounds a bit, but it's really not difficult.
Can you remember anything about your time in the scrub, in the dirtiest place the army could find you, that you remember thinking, once you got to Vietnam, well, that was, some good training for this? Were there any situations where you could link it back to your training and think that was pretty well on the money?
The artillery, and I speak only for the artillery, what we do, the way that we train in peacetime, is exactly the same as what we do in wartime, so nothing changes. It is exactly the same. I suppose the other people, other infantry, that might be exactly the same as them. I know for a fact that that's what we do. The way we train in peacetime is the way we fight in war, and that's it. So there's nothing different. You just, perhaps there's a little bit more intensity there, because if you get it wrong, then, somebody could get killed that shouldn't have been killed. But that's it in a nutshell. We do it in peace, we do it in war.
Was there fear that you might hurt your own infantry with your weaponry?
Might hurt our own troops? No, never. And that is because of the training that we do, or that we did before we went away. At that time, it was generally recognised that the troops that we sent to Vietnam were the highest trained that had ever left Australia's shores. There was never any doubt in my mind that if I did it the way I'd been trained to do it, there would be no accident. And I can say without fear of contradiction for anybody else that might see this, I was in charge of a gun as a gun sergeant for a number of years, and not once during that time did I ever make a mistake. And that is due entirely to the training that the artillery makes you do, and the system of what we call independent checks. There is nothing that I did that somebody else wouldn't do, or none of my soldiers would do, that I didn't do, and that doesn't mean you're looking over their shoulders. There's ways and means that you can check without them even knowing, and that's the artillery survives on that, and it's second to none in my opinion, the way they train.
Do you remember the day you left?
Left where?
Left Australia for Vietnam.
Oh yeah, I certainly do. It was from Townsville Airport, and of course it's an emotional time for everybody, and I remember when I left. If you ask me exactly what day and date, no idea, but I remember the events of that day. I think we left at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon from memory, and you sort of live with those sorts of emotional things, and that's it. I don't even remember the date, because I went on what was called the advance party. They always send some people over first to take over things and get ready for the main people to arrive later. But ask me what day, can't tell you. With a date, wouldn't have a clue.
How long had you signed up for?
Originally or in total?
Originally.
Originally I signed on for 3 years, which was the minimum time. And then I thought, oh, this is not too bad. I sort of responded to that pretty well. And then I went for 6 years, I think, and so on, and then totaled up to 21 years or whatever it is, 20 years and 11 and a half months or something, whatever it was.
So did you get a plane or over to Vietnam, or was it by ship? Oh, it's from Townsville Airport, so it was a plane.
went by plane.
And civilian, or?
Yeah, it was civilian, actually Qantas. We went over by Qantas, and going over, you could have I think you could have a beer if you wanted to. They were fairly strict on how much you could have. And it was quite alarming, actually, when the damn thing landed at the airport in Saigon. It blew a tyre, and it went off with an almighty bloody bang. And we thought, oh, Christ, we've only just landed and the buggers are shooting at us already, And it turned out to be a tyre, so that's all it was. But it was a bit, I mean, we've just landed there, and I thought, what the hell? They didn't even give us a chance to get organised yet. So that was a bit. Well, we laughed at it when the pilot just came on and said, "Don't fret yourself." He said, "It's only a tyre."
So you said you had some Nashos working with you. Mm-hmm. Was that in Vietnam?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
So you felt you put your complete trust in them as you would a professional soldier?
No doubt. Absolutely no doubt. The reason I say that is because even though they'd done their core training, their artillery training, when they come to me, I used to use a couple of short, sharp words to them. I said that we considered ourselves here the best in this unit. If you don't think that way, you can leave right now. If you stay, then you're going to get what the rest of them get to bring up to scratch. And I never had anybody that turned away, and within just a matter of maybe a few days, because they'd had their basic skill training, then you polish them up a little bit, and you just sort of keep at them, and right now you're just about right. And encouragement was the word. And then after that, if they got it wrong, it was slightly different. But initially, and I never had anyone that I can't remember anyone that was a complete dunderhead. They were all really good.
Well, did you have military police there?
Yes, we did.
And?
And one of them cost me a lot of money, let me put it that way.
How was that?
Well, I did something that I shouldn't have done, but if he'd have used his common sense, and we'd come out of the jungle for a 36-hour leave, and there are certain places that are out of bounds, and it was almost impossible to keep track of them, even though before you went down, people would read you out, you know, you're not allowed to go here. So I got caught in one of these, and
one of what?
In one of these out of bounds areas, a pub, and it wasn't supposed to be in there, and he booked me, and it cost me a lot of money.
When you say out of bound areas, were they out of bounds because they were possible enemy were there?
Probably, possibly, yes.
Or was it because they just didn't want the soldiers going to pubs?
And it could have been, now let me be brutally frank here, it could have been that there were prostitutes in there who were diseased and they weren't taking care of themselves. And of course, you know, you get a few beers in and before you know it, you've lost a couple of soldiers for a few days. Those reasons, or it might have been, as you say, there might have been undesirables in there. It might have been a known, perhaps, black market establishment and so on. So they put it out of bounds.
So you got docked some pay, did you?
I got docked some pay for doing other things as well, but we better not go into that because that military policeman might end up watching this one day.
They wouldn't have been too popular, would they, the
Who's
military police?
I think they were maligned a lot. There were some really good people amongst them, but every now and again you would get somebody like this who was a little bit of an upstart. They are now quite, even then they were quite professional. They were, you know, in their job as good as anybody else. I think perhaps they couldn't realise that, hey, look, this fella's just come out of the scrub, I need to perhaps back off a little bit here and accept that what he's telling me. Occasionally they wouldn't do that, so, but no, they're all right. I know some of the old Second World War guys used to call them meatheads and all sorts of ugly other things which we can't go into here, but no, they are a part of service life and a necessary part of service life.
What about the Americans? Did you hear any stories about them?
Oh. Look, I don't mean anything derogatory about American people because I like American people, but we had an American artillery battery with us in Vietnam, and we used to foster good relations. We would go down to their guns because they had these huge great things. And we thought, oh God, I'd love to get hold of one of these. And, you know, wouldn't mind having a crack at that. So we went down there, was a group of about 5 or 6 of us, and they were quite prepared to let us fire the thing. And we went down there and I looked at this bloke and I said to the fellow, what's the matter with him? Is he drunk? Because this is the middle of the day. And he said, no, he's stoned. And this is in the middle of the day, in a war, and they don't care. They're into the weed, you know, having a great old time. You want some of this, man? I said, no, thanks. And they couldn't understand why we wouldn't do it. They even had their own drug rehabilitation clinics in the American services. Can you believe that? I think we have now too. But it used to be the case, if you got caught with drugs in the services, no ifs, buts or maybes, you're gone in a matter of hours, your backside is out the door, we don't want you.
So it was quite prevalent, or...
Yes, in the Vietnam War, it was. There's no doubt about it.
Amongst the Americans?
About the American servicemen, there's no doubt about it.
And what about harder drugs? Did you know of any harder?
Don't know. We only ever saw... They would be on the booze in the middle of the day. But I never saw any of the hard stuff. I suppose it was there. I mean, if they got marijuana and booze and whatever, they just didn't really seem to give a care.
Where were they getting the marijuana from?
Where there's a will, there's a way. I suppose some of the locals were growing it somewhere, or even them. You know, somebody might have set up their own little farm somewhere, and the old black market was rife amongst the Americans.
That would have had to have affected their capabilities.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't operate when you can't drive a car. You just can't operate when you're drugged up to the eyeballs, or drunk, or both. So, yep, that's their problem. And
you've got to wonder how, given that your judgment would be so impaired,
Absolutely.
Either being stoned or drunk, how that impacts in a battle situation.
Yeah, it has to have an effect. God bless the Americans, they can have them.
Just getting back more to the beginning of your time in Vietnam. When you first got there, when you first arrived there, were you thinking it looks pretty much like where I've come from? Was it much of a difference, climate-wise, vegetation?
It was probably a little bit flatter and a little bit more open. Malaysia was really closed in close jungle most of the time, and when we actually arrived at Nui Dat, which was the main headquarters there, it was quite open. I guess it had been cleared over a period of time so they could put in all the defences. But even so, you follow the river, the valleys down, and it was, I think it was a lot flatter than Malaysia, and generally speaking, was a lot more open, not as much closed in jungle, because they had those defoliant programs going, which killed everything. So perhaps that was the reason why.
Did you ever have a chance to see them using Agent Orange?
We had it, yeah, I mean, there's very few soldiers I know that haven't experienced it, because we had it sprayed on us quite regularly. They used that to deprive the bad guys of a place to hide by killing the trees, so they couldn't get in there. That's what it was all about. It was common for these things, and we said, what the hell is that? And then you could taste it, you know, because it was sprayed in the air. But not only that, it got in the water supply and everything. So it is responsible for a lot of hideous things that I really don't think they've come to the bottom of. They've got to the bottom of yet. So it will be...
what are you thinking of?
More probably cancer type things, or you know, it's no secret that a lot of Vietnam veterans have got psychological problems, and extreme ones. How they deal with it in different ways is probably not so well documented. But we believe that it was the defoliant that's caused most of these problems. And then, of course, the treatment when you got back, and on it goes, it just snowballs, so it all become one angry little ball that you carry around with you all the time. So never mind, you deal with it.
We've talked to some people who chose not to have children after being exposed to Agent Orange.
Yeah, I can understand it. Maria lost a child when we came home, and then I know people that have had children and they've been deformed and so on and so on. And you look at children that are being born now, still over there, have got severe birth deformities. And it's all linked, in my humble opinion, to this bloody stuff they sprayed all around the place.
So you've got to Vietnam, and what at that stage information did you have about where the war was? How was it progressing? How was Australia within that war? What did you know at that time?
We were always winning. We were always told we were winning. You know, there's no doubt about it. We're going to win this thing. Well, we bloody well didn't we? And once again, I think it comes back to what the Americans want you to believe, what should be disseminated down to people, and so on and so on. And that's why the American forces, I distrust the American forces to this very day. But I like the American people. That's it.
What were the troops telling each other? It must have been a slightly different story.
There was a particular group of bad guys. They were called the D445 Battalion. And we reckon they were phantoms, because we could never find the buggers. We bombed them and shot them and chased them for years. And we said, you know, they bloody well don't exist. It's a load of bullshit that the Yanks are feeding us to keep you on your toes and so on and so on. Well, as it turned out, they bloody well did exist. Now that after the war is over and some of our guys go over, they meet them. They meet the commander and so forth in the equivalent of what's their RSL. And they just get together and talk. You know, there's immense respect. Something I'd thought about doing, I don't know. But they certainly did exist, and they were pretty good at what they were doing as well. So.
Well, you didn't find them.
No, we couldn't catch them, but they were worried about us. There was a doco done by one of the TV channels some time ago, and it was SBS, I think, and they said that the North Vietnamese were more concerned about the Australians than they were about the Americans because of the experience that we'd had in Malaysia. And they'd heard of, you know, that the Australians are generally regarded as the best people in the jungle in the world. Now, I don't know what this says about us, because it's a filthy bloody joint sometimes. But we were good at it. So they were a bit wary of us, but they had a nickname for the Americans. They used to call them running dogs. So that was interesting to hear the commander say that. This is not just a fabrication. This is what he said they used to do.
Running dogs. How
I
imagine that's an insult.
It was an insult.
Yeah. How does that translate?
I don't know whether they thought they weren't worth a cracker and that they could stitch them up any time they liked because they'd turn around and run. You know, it's that suggestion, I suppose, be it true or not. But that's stated. I've actually got the tape that states that.
Well, it sounds to me that the Australian troops were very well disciplined.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's and not only personal discipline, but their discipline in the scrub as well. If they were going looking for trouble, absolutely wonderful to see. If the Yanks were going looking for trouble, they'd be walking down the middle of a road with this thing hanging over their side. They're going duck shooting. And they got a transistor radio stuck up here on a rubber band on their hat, and they're listening to the local armed forces radio, and they're going looking for trouble. I know there's going to get trouble. The Australians were totally the opposite. They wouldn't move along tracks wherever possible. They'd work through the scrub, because if you're on a track, obviously you're in trouble, and that's the way they did it, and that's why they were so bloody good.
Did you have occasion to be in that kind of frontline situation?
No, I was with the guns, and that was it. We provided fire support for those poor buggers that needed it, and that's what we did. We had a couple of scary moments, which turned out to be nothing, but you know, at that time you're not too sure, so we did what we had to do. So
with the gun support, would you move into a position and hold a position of defending the people that were in the front line? Or could you explain to me exactly what
would happen is, if a particular group of infantry people going out to do a job, they would be allocated some guns to use at their priority. You know, that's, if I get myself in the shit, I can ring them up on the wireless and say, this is what, and you know, give me some bombs, basically. And that's what it was. And we would always move to stay in range of wherever they were moving. It wasn't a very big place, so you didn't do a lot of movement, but basically that's what it was. You were given somebody to look after, and that's what we did. And did it pretty bloody well too, I might tell you. They were pretty professional.
Because we have heard of some incidences, you know, and obviously tragic accidents, where Australians were killed by their own fire. Mm-hmm. That would have been, or I should ask you, was that a weight on your mind? I mean, if your aim is wrong, or
if I had done that,
is wrong?
Yeah, if I had done that, I think that would weigh on my mind until the day I die, because you got it wrong. Now, it might mean that you did something wrong, and they can prove it. They've got procedures that they go through to find out how it happened. And as I said before, I've never done it, and that's something that pleases the hell out of me. But it does happen, and it is bound to happen, and such is the nature of war, that somebody is going to make a mistake, and some poor bugger is going to die that probably shouldn't. It's happened how many times in Iraq with the Americans, the good old Yanks again. It was interesting to note that when the SAS was there doing their job, they never lost one soldier. Now, what does that tell you?
Expertise.
Absolutely, very, very good at their job. So that's it.
So did you, I'll start that again. In a battle situation, a conflict situation, would they tend to happen during daylight hours, or was there a certain time when a battle would take place, or was it very unpredictable?
There was a saying that was true. The daylight belongs to us, because we had all the superiority. We had all the guns and the bombs and the aeroplanes, and the North Vietnamese, or the Viet Cong if you like, had nothing. But the night time, it was a different kettle of fish. They had the advantage because they worked at night, and that's when they would do their work at night time. We began to overcome them a bit with night vision bits and pieces and so forth, and of course if you prepare your defence as well, which we've proven time and time again by the Australians in particular, then you are going to acquit yourself quite well. And I think that's why they probably enjoyed having a shot at the Yanks more than having a shot at us. But sooner or later they would have to have a go at us, because it couldn't be seen that they were, you know, a bit wary of where we are and what we were doing. So, yeah, the night time belonged to them.
Well, can you tell me then, you're in a position of defence, or you're ready to defend the frontline people. It's night time, so how do you set up for that situation? And how are you protecting yourselves?
Well, you have to give yourself sufficient time in daytime to get ready for the night time. We learned a couple of lessons there where that wasn't quite the case, and they got belted, to be quite honest with you. And what you would do is, around your position, you set up defences such as anti-personnel mines, I don't know whether you know what a claymore mine is. You can set it up where you think, or you hope to Christ they're going to come, so if they do, you've got the advantage. So you do that around your position. You have other things like trip flares, where if they come where you hope they will, they click a wire and up they go and you can see them because they're stuck up with all these flares, and you can give them a bit of a dust up. As well as that, it's not just a matter of packing up at night time and going to bed. You always have sentries on duty at strategic points around your position all night and all day, as long as you're there. There's always somebody listening, looking, watching to give you a warning of anything that's going to happen. That's something Americans don't do. They have no idea why we do what we do, but we stay alive a bloody lot longer than they do, I can promise you that.
So what would be the warning signals? How would a sentry indicate that there was something?
If he was suspicious, I'll tell you what happened, and this is an incident that happened to me. We were in bed and it was absolutely pelting down rain and the bloody water and the mud was everywhere, and I was sitting there feeling miserable even though I was in my, I was wet as hell, and one of my soldiers came over, hey. I said, what's the matter? He said, I think there's somebody outside the wire. And I said, okay, right. So I went across, and it was very difficult to see because it was a grey night and drizzly rain, and if something moved, you'd swear blind it was a person. So I said, all right, and I rang up the officer that was in charge of the local defence, and I said, look, I'm not real sure. And he said, oh, well, maybe we'll go back to bed. And I said, no. I said, why don't you show some faith in these two soldiers that have come and woke me up, and we'll give them a bit of a blast up. And he said, righto, that's what we'll do. So I got, this is a Howitzer, a gun, and it's got a shell that you fire. It's like a big shotgun cartridge. So we got everybody out there and we just pointed this thing out and let fly with it, and it cleared everything. Well, it turned out to be nobody there, but that was the sort of thing. That's what your sentries are there for, if they even get suspicious. And then if you back them up, if they know that they do the job and they're going to get backed up properly, then they'll do it even better. And that, I'm glad that idiot of an officer said, yeah, let fly with it. So we did that, and it turned out pretty well. That's what we do.
And as you say, it showed confidence in their decision making.
Absolutely, yeah. You say, these guys have been good sentries, they're suspicious, and that's all it takes, a bit of suspicion, and then you have to go out and give them support. So we did.
Must have been quite a nerve-wracking job.
A sentry?
Yes.
Oh, damn right. I mean, everybody does it, but it is. I mean, while everyone else is asleep, you're there, making sure they don't wake up dead. It is a very responsible job.
And how many hours sleep would you have had under your belt while you're doing that?
It depends. So you will always have people taken away from your unit. Some are home on R&R, some are sick, some are required back in the base camp to help somebody peel spuds and do all that sort of stuff. So you, generally speaking, you're probably out of 7 people, you're down to about 4 or 5 most of the time. So you work that out, 5 people over from 6 o'clock at night till say 6 in the morning, and you divide that, that lets you know how much sleep you're not going to get during that particular time. If it was 6 people, it'd be 2 hours, so 5's about, you'd be there for 2.5 hours or something.
And then sleep for how long?
If nothing interrupts you, then you can get back into bed and go to sleep until they wake you up again in the morning. I can remember one particular place we had where things were really bad for manpower, and we were averaging 3.5 to 4 hours sleep a night. But the days weren't quite so bad. There wasn't a lot of activity, so you could have a bit of a snooze, and it wasn't as bad as it seems.
Having so little sleep though, plus being on sentry duty, have to play with your nerves a bit.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I mean, you get a bit strung out, you get a bit edgy after a while. I mean, that's why you're promoted for a start, because you're the guy that's supposed to be able to handle this, but you are also the guy that's supposed to be able to handle the guys that are out there trying to do it. So, if you don't want the promotion and responsibility, then don't get promoted. It's as simple as that.
So is this correct, at night time you would have your anti-personnel mines, your trip flares,
yes.
Then what's your next line of defence?
Probably barbed wire.
Barbed wire.
Yeah. And then the machine gun post, with the sentry post that you manned, would have a machine gun in them as well. And another nasty little thing, it was used to fire hand grenades, basically.
Did anyone get through all of that?
No, not that we know about anyway. They got through some defences because people got there late in the afternoon and didn't have a chance.
You were saying earlier
fully prepared.
that preparation was the key. Can you talk about incidences where the preparation didn't happen?
Yeah, look, this is well documented. You've heard of Coral and Balmoral? Well, that was pretty much the case there. They arrived late in the afternoon, too late to set up proper defences, and they paid the penalty.
Can you talk me through it?
I don't really know. I wasn't there. I've only read it in books, and of course you can do that. But it is common knowledge that was why they got a bit of a dust-up, because they didn't get there in time to get properly organised and get their defences done and so forth. Now, I don't think anyone will dispute that.
How else could they have approached it, though?
Got there earlier.
So
there was a lot of dithering, and I think there was a change of mind, a change of position, and the whole thing didn't quite work the way it militarily should have. But they got out of it quite lightly. I think they had only 1 or 2 people killed, but they stitched them up pretty well. I forget the actual, it doesn't matter, the figures are not, but they gave more than they got. So that's an example of their training, I'm sure.
Did you ever have to defend American troops or
No.
engineers or?
No, never had anything to do with them, thank God for that, except for the artillery mob that was with us. Their idea of securing a position at night time, for example, let's take an infantry platoon. This is back then. They would, no, this will do. Righto, we'll sleep here tonight. And just before dark, they'd get everybody to line up, and they would shoot the hell out of the scrub. Shoot every bush and whatever, and then, okay, we're safe now, we'll go to sleep. And seriously, that's some of the things they used to do. How can you do that? I couldn't sleep.
I can see why Australian troops wouldn't want to be in the same vicinity as the Americans.
Yeah. No, they didn't want to be anywhere near them.
It was a liability.
By choice, yeah. I mean, they're going to cause you more harm than good. No, not nice.
Did you ever see a North Vietnamese, did you ever see the face of the enemy?
In the scrub? No. I saw them once back in camp. I had to go across to headquarters for some reason. No, I went across to the medical centre, and they had a couple in there that were getting, like I said before, getting medical treatment. And they just looked just as bloody scared as we were, you know. And you couldn't help but feel sorry for the poor little buggers. And they're only quite tiny people. And you knew that basically who they were, because they all had their black pyjamas on, but they had handcuffs and all sorts of things on. And they were getting some sort of medical treatment. And I thought, good God almighty, poor little buggers.
Do you think you would have got treated as well if Australian troops had been captured by them?
I don't think, well, I suppose again, if you listen to your intelligence reports, probably not. I think they, you know, life didn't really mean too much to them. They'd cut your throat as quick as look at you. If they couldn't get the answers from you, then, you know, it was by fair means or foul, the old torture, I think. I don't know this for a fact. People better qualified than me in interviews will give you better answers than this, but no, I'm not too sure.
So, in the position you were in, and you know, firing these guns to some distance, what kind of distance are we talking?
The maximum range was 11,000 metres.
So it's highly unlikely that you would ever see, and you've confirmed that already, any faces. You wouldn't see the people.
No, you never see the results in physicality. But to help you and know that you've done a good job, what the people up the other end would do was tell you what the results were. And it would be very short, sharp and brief. They would say something like 10 KIAs, means killed in action, and so many wounded, and whatever collateral or military or mechanical damage, and they would let you know that. And you'd sit there and say, well, we didn't do too bad, you know, and that's very important. Because there's nothing worse than you going bang, 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 and sweating and bloody, and nobody tells you what you've done, what the results are. The minute they do that, then you think, right, we've done a pretty good job. Makes a huge difference.
It absolutely sounds like you did do a good job, and they must have had, you know, immense faith, or felt very confident having you lot behind them. I wonder though, was there ever a time when you stepped outside of that military training, or you know, took that hat off, and thought about it in human terms?
Yes, I mentioned before that we saw some photographs of some young, not more than kids, young girls that had been killed, but they were brought down by the North Vietnamese to fight us. And you think, what the bloody hell's going on? Is this what we come here to do? So you start to ask yourself a few questions, and I suppose from a male point of view, when you're looking at a little girl there that's about 12 or 14 years old, that tends to hit me harder than if it was a boy, 12 or 14. Don't ask me why. What's the difference? I don't know. But then you start to do a bit of soul searching. This is not nice here.
But if they were men, then
if they were
it's
grown
easier
men,
to...
fair enough. No, as far as I'm concerned, with the utmost respect, they're fair game because they'll do it to you. If they are, men armed to come and have a shot at you, not a problem. I don't have any trouble with that at all. Within reason, of course. I mean, I couldn't just go up and shoot one of them in the head for any reason, but if he was going to do me, then I would do my damnedest to get him first. That's the nature of war, I guess.
Did it ever occur to you that you might be killed?
Oh, hell yeah. I don't know whether yes I did. I mentioned before I've seen what a hand grenade can do. Well, I was actually in there when the bloody thing went off, but I was fortunate that I was in a position where I could just sit around the corner of the bunker away from it. But I saw the look on the fella's face that was over there, so I've seen what it can do.
As it was lobbed in?
As it exploded. It actually went off, and it made a bit of a mess.
So you could see this man's face as
I
he
was
realised.
watching him. And he was laying, the doorway was there, and he was there, and the hand grenade went off out here. Well, I was sitting just there, and I just ducked around the corner, and he could see it, and the look on his face. He tried to protect himself with a blow-up mattress. That's all he could do. He just couldn't react quick enough to get to the side, to get away from it, and it come through the door. And he turned over, and it got him up the back, which is probably a good thing. If he'd have stayed that way, God knows, it might have done his eyes and all sorts of things. So, apart from the mattress, which wasn't going to help, he did the next best thing and turned his back on it. So.
And he survived?
He survived. Oh yeah. He's alive and ticking. He's doing pretty well. So, that's one of those sad things that happens.
Well, there are many sad things that happened over there. Did you ever? It seems that you were a well-trained soldier and you went in there having a fair idea of what you were about to meet. Mm-hmm. And you had a supportive family at home, mm-hmm. which I am sure makes a difference to how people deal with things.
Certainly does, yeah.
Did you encounter men who weren't able to deal with what they were seeing and what they were experiencing?
I did a little bit later on, but I didn't know it at the time. I had an occasion to discipline a soldier because I pointed out a little something that was wrong, and had we have let it go, would have the projectile would have finished up where it shouldn't have. But when I just quite reasonably pointed out to this fella that he needed to change it, he went troppo. And now I'd been with this fella for 18 months, and it just went off, and the lid come completely off, and so much so that we shifted him from my gun onto somebody else's because it got quite heated.
When you say he went troppo, what did he do? What happened?
He threatened me with all sorts of things, and it got down to, if you're not quiet, I'll, with pretty strong language, you're going to jail. So that sort of toned him down a bit, but he made it quite clear, and I agreed with him that he needed to go somewhere else. So he did. We didn't make a big deal out of it. We just said, right, away you go.
Do you think in hindsight that was a stress-related situation?
I'm sure it was, because it's unrelenting. Even whether you're out in a scrub or not, you are still in a place where a war is going on, and it never really lets up. It gets worse, or it doesn't. It eases off a bit. Perhaps, I don't know. I think that's the case. It just never ends, and some people handle it better than others, but no disgrace to those who don't quite do it as well as some of the others, because I know people that have done it better than me. Even though you do the very best you can, I'm sure people done it a hell of a lot better than what I did. So, but I don't feel any shame about that. I did the best that I could possibly do.
How do you feel that you could have done better?
I don't know. I don't feel that I could, but I say that because perhaps there were people that were better at the job than what I was. That's just a broad statement. If you ask me, being an egotistical bugger, did I believe that? No, I don't. I thought I was pretty good at what I did, and that's as honest as I can be.
There's nothing wrong with saying that you're good at what you do.
No, I accept that, but probably there are others that were better. It doesn't matter how good you are, there's always somebody better. So there you go.
And how did you take the nerves and the stress? How did you deal with that?
That's why you're promoted. People see in you some leadership qualities, the ability to accept responsibility, do a good job, all those things, and on you go. If you're not prepared to do that, maybe you should look at yourself first of all and say, no, I don't want to be promoted, I'm quite happy where I am. Or you can say, okay, well, I've taken another step up the ladder, here's a challenge. Let's see how you go, stupid. Let's just see what you can do. And that's the way I looked at it.
Big challenge. Can
be, yeah, particularly in a wartime. Peacetime, it's still a challenge, but it's not as big as that. But,
in a wartime
situation. I did okay, I think. I never made any, didn't do anything too dreadful.
Were you associated with anyone who didn't come back from Vietnam? Or you did mention your friend before, your godfather, but did you lose friends in Vietnam? I didn't lose any in Vietnam, but I've lost a couple since we've been home. And reunions are really great. You look forward to going and having a good time, but there's always going to be someone that's not there. And that happened to me in Sydney. You probably recall they had the big welcome home parade in Sydney in '92. Well, away I went, and I'd rounded up most of my soldiers. You know, I said, where is this particular guy? And I won't mention his name out of respect to the family, but he was a good soldier. And they said, what are you talking about? And I said, where is he? And I said, I was talking to him on Anzac Day, and he said he was going to be here. And they just looked at me, and they said, you don't know, do you? And I said, where is he? And he said, he shot himself. So the reunions are good, but I learnt then that somebody is not going to be here. So just, you know, you temper it with a little bit of caution, I think. And that's happened a few times since then. Not blokes that I absolutely knew intimately, you know, but they were in the same unit. And, oh, bugger, you know, he died or whatever. So heartbreaking stuff.
Yeah, you need to be a little bit careful where it's somebody that you've served with, and you think, oh, what a bloody shame, you know, oh, good, I didn't know that. So there's always a little bit of a downside to reunions.
John, did you have to take your rifle with you everywhere when you weren't with your gun?
No. It was the case back in years gone by. A soldier was given a rifle and that was his, and he would take it with him wherever he went. But no, with the more modern weapons, because they're so easily adjustable to a particular person's individual shooting pattern, you just get a new one or another one whenever you go to another unit.
So if you were walking around, say for example, if you'd gone from the dug-in position of your gun to go to the toilet or something like that, you wouldn't take a weapon with you?
Oh yeah, in that case, yeah. I thought you meant if I sort of went from Sydney to another unit in Townsville, would I take a rifle? No, you get another one up there. But yes, what you're saying is true. When you are in a war situation, you don't even go to the toilet without your rifle. You don't even go to bed without it. It has to be within arm's reach all the time.
Did you ever have to use yours?
No, I didn't. I never ever used that to shoot anybody, no.
Did you ever use it to intimidate people into...
Well, I'm not sure. We saw people at times, you know, sort of skulking around in the scrub and all that sort of stuff. Whether they knew that we were there and the fact that we had weapons was enough to discourage them or not, but no, I never ever fired at anybody.
Did you find it hard? I'm wondering whether, as an artilleryman, you ever saw people come close enough to you, whether they'd got past the infantry by mistake, or whether you ever saw civilians, basically, and had to make a call that that's a civilian. And
yeah, I certainly did. Quite often, it was reasonably easy to identify them, and I use Vietnam as an example. There were some rules of engagement that we used to stick by, and as long as you went by them, by and large, you were pretty safe. Quite often civilians would walk down the road. You know, we might be fairly adjacent to a road or in one case I remember we were right near a highway, and they would be just driving up and down all day, just going about their normal business. One particular place we were at, across the road from us was an American unit, and we heard all this kerfuffle in the middle of the night, and it turned out that they'd shot up the local South Vietnamese commander as he drove down in his Jeep, so they got that wrong. Yeah, that's just things like that that happen.
That didn't happen that you saw?
No, we never did any. I never had occasion to actually physically shoot at anybody with a rifle.
How did the Vietnamese people respond to you if you were having a bit of leave, wandering around with a rifle slung over your shoulder?
I don't recall any nasty incidents. I think probably because they all needed money. You know, their country was in a diabolical state, and if they could be nice to you, even though they didn't like you, and you would spend your money in their shop, then that's fine. And can you blame them for that? No, I don't think so. They have to survive in the best possible way that they can. There is a very good story that goes around about the local madam who owned a brothel, and everyone over there was paid in military payment certificates, which was put out by the Americans. And at about 1 minute to midnight, she was a millionaire, and about 1 minute past, she wasn't worth a cracker because they changed all the military payment certificates, and hers wasn't worth anything. So that was a funny little story that goes around.
Did you have any leave during your 12 months?
Oh yeah. Everyone came home for 5 days R&R. They would fly you back, all free of charge, obviously, and you would spend 5 days with your family, and then back you go again. They had another thing that they called recreational leave. It was usually a 36-hour thing, where they would take you to a place called Vung Tau, which had been set up with a swimming pool and picture theatre and open-air picture theatres, and it was right near the beach, and they had everything. They had sailboats, ski boats, all that, just so you could go down there and have a bit of a ski and get away from the nasty stuff, if you like.
How often did you go to Vung Tau?
I only managed to get there twice in the 12 months that I was there, and the second time I had to be ordered to go down there because it was close to coming home, and of course your nerves are starting to wear a little bit thin, I suppose, and I didn't want to go, and I said, look, if I go down there and get a skinful of grog and carry on like an idiot, I'll get in trouble. And we're going home in a couple of months, I don't need that. But I was ordered to go, so I didn't think too much of that, but I went, and I didn't get in trouble anyway, so I guess all is well.
It seems like music was an important part of this period of time. I mean, it was a big change in music styles.
Oh, definitely.
You had the entertainers over there.
Yep.
You were allowed to take a guitar, which seems extraordinary even to you, a serviceman.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And songs like, I was only 19 and things like that seem to have really hit home with some guys.
Yeah, that particular, that was written by, obviously this guy in Adelaide, and it is generally accepted as, what can I put it? It's generally accepted as being the Vietnam Veterans Anthem, which is, it's a great song. I like the fella that did it. I'm sorry he failed at politics because I think he could have been very, very good. But it's a beautiful song.
You had 5 days to come back to Australia at some point in your tour. Was that about halfway through?
No, I deliberately took it a little bit later because I knew when I went back I'd have a lot less than halfway to go. I think I had about 4 months to go after I went back. So that was done quite deliberately. I reckon I could hang out a bit longer when I was initially there, and then have a shorter time, and I felt pretty confident about doing that, and then coming home as a normal person, if you like.
What could you tell Maria about what was going on over there?
What could I tell her? Nothing. I didn't really tell her about the war, about what was going on, and that is a bit of a problem because you bottle it up inside. I have done in dribs and drabs since. So she now understands. But they did something. I was going to the counselling service, the one the Vietnam Veterans one, and my kids used to say, you know, what's the matter with the old boy? He's been watching too many war movies. So unbeknownst to me, my wife took my children to the counselling service to talk to the lady that I was talking to, and she told them why I was going and why almost all Vietnam veterans were going, and what had happened, and these was, you know, possible things and causes, and they just sort of sat there like that and said, bloody hell, you know, so he hasn't been watching too many movies after all. And that seemed to change things around. You know, there was no more snide comments and so on. There was a lot more understanding, and it's just got better and better as the years go by. So I'm one of the lucky ones. I know people that are worse now than they've ever been, but I'm doing all right. I'm quite fine. At least I'm not on bloody medication like a lot of them are. Not for psychological problems.
It's hard to defend something you don't want to talk about, and when people make remarks along those lines, or you feel as though people might think, oh, what's he on about? It can't have been all that bad. And I think for every vet that must be different. What is it for John? What is it for you?
If somebody says something like that?
No, what is it for you that has been the trigger for needing assistance?
My wife told me, she said, you either, you know, we knew the service was available, but you like to think, once again, you're military trained, I can handle this. Well, the truth is you bloody well can't. And I think it got fairly grim, and she said, you really do need to talk to somebody, because our relationship is in a very diabolical state. Now, there was a hidden message there for me, and it said to me, get it fixed or you ain't going to have a bloody wife and family to come home to if you're not careful. And that's what made me go. But even going, you know, they sort of had to keep chipping away. Because somebody once said to me, in fact Maria said to me, before I started to go to the counselling service, she said, you're like living with a bloody Iceman. She said, nothing shows. And they chip away at it and they chip away at it, and they don't break you down, but they get inside, and then they can start to fix it up. And that's what happened to me. It will never be perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than what it was, I can tell you that. We still have moments. We've developed a little system where I can say, I've got the whole shits with I've got the shits with the whole bloody world, and it's got nothing to do with you, and she knows what's going on. So don't push me, don't badger me, just and you deal with it in your own way. It might take a day or two, but that's fine. At least you're past the yelling and screaming stage. So that's a good thing to have.
What was putting your marriage under pressure? Was it your not being able to deal with the aggression?
It was
properly,
the effects of the war. Not necessarily aggression, but the war in particular. You know, the effect that it has on you, the continual stress, the Agent Orange, the snide comments, the buddy coming home, and so on. All of that. It just eats away at you, and it turns you into not a nice person.
People often talk about their nerves. What is that from your experience? What is...
From my experience, if I hear loud noises, it's something quite startling. The reaction is to sort of head for the bloody hills and get out of the road, or or let out with an expletive, you know, a real cracker, and you know, you can imagine what's said. That still happens now. I guess. See, the army winds you up to do a job, but they don't unwind you. That's a terrible thing. They should, in my humble opinion, when you are getting towards the end of your service and you've indicated that that's, you know, I'm going to take my time. The last 6 months you should be turned into a civilian. You should be allowed to turn up, still being paid by them because they took you on in the first place. Let your hair grow long, wear civilian clothes, and delouse you, turn you back into something other than a bloody lunatic soldier. But they don't do that, and I think they really should. There is an onus on them to do that because they've had my services for 20 years. I know people that photograph of the fella on the wall. He did 36 years. He was, at that time, the longest serving soldier in the Australian Army. I imagine he still is, or was. Can you imagine what he's like? That's why he lives in the scrub. He doesn't...
This is obviously hearsay, but why do you think guys go to live in the scrub?
Why? Because Actually, that's a damn good question. I mean, it would be easy to give a blasé answer, but from where I sit, it would be because they don't want to put up with idiots that keep making these smart aleck remarks. They can't deal with people. They're just quite happy, and most of them, now wives are gone, so there's another kick in the guts. They are quite happy with their own company, and they're not necessarily alcoholics or drug addicts. They're just people that have decided, I don't need this shit. I'm quite happy, and this fella lives in a very, very nicely decorated bus. It's got its own shower and toilet. It's all done in red cedar. And when he gets fed up, he cranks up the old bus and goes 500 miles up the road and just stays there for a while. That's his lifestyle, and he loves it. That's how he deals with things. What makes him do it? All of those things, the war, the reaction from people, and because he can be quite volatile. If you set him off, he's like a firecracker. He knows it, so I'll give him 10 points out of 10 for knowing that. That's his life. He's happy.
What has stopped John Plenty throwing his hands up in the air and saying, to hell with this?
That's easy. Yeah, she's up in the bedroom, a bit crook at the moment. If it wasn't for her, no, not strictly Maria, but if it wasn't for my wife and family, I really think that things might have been terminated some time ago, when the storm clouds were really dark and ugly and all that sort of business. It was my wife and family that pulled me through it, and they still do. Now I've got grandchildren, so that gives me something else to look forward to. It's just family. In a word, your family. In my case, it was my family. It's as simple as that. Because my wife wouldn't quit. She wouldn't give up. Some do. They say, I've had enough. Can't deal with it anymore. Just can't help you. No, get out. But she doesn't. So there it is, in a nutshell.
Will this legacy ever leave you?
The legacy of the war? The day I die. But you deal with it. You learn to handle it with help, and you deal with it, and you just keep going forward. Don't ever keep looking over your shoulder, because you'll turn around and go backwards. And that's something that nobody needs. You do not need to go back where you come from when you know what was there when you left it. So it's as simple as that.
When you returned home, there were some disappointments and difficulty with people's reactions. Mm-hmm. Yep. Can you talk to me about that from a soldier's perspective?
Yeah, I can. I was sent to Manly as an instructor, and we socialised a little bit there and went out a couple of times, and people will make those comments. We shouldn't have been in the bloody war, and what these people did, and F this and F that, and so on. And after a while, you know, as a normal human being, you're not going to take it. And of course, it comes to a verbal confrontation, which quite often led to a physical confrontation. Before you know it, you're in trouble with the coppers, or you're in trouble with the army, because you're still trying to make a career out of this. It didn't happen to me quite so often, but I know people that, once or twice a week, and then of course the police come around. It was that lack of, we didn't get a hero's welcome like we thought we bloody well deserved, like the people from the Second World War got. We got absolutely nothing until we did it ourselves. It was up to us to generate our own parade in Sydney. When we started to put that in motion, and the government, of course, jumped on board, and then it just swelled up from there. But it was the Vietnam veterans who started that. And then the Air Force helped with transport and so on, and it couldn't have been done without all those people that lumped in, including the government, to help us out and finance it and do all that. But it was the blokes themselves that got it all going. And along with that, they then decided to build a memorial in Canberra. But again, people helped with finance, and the government and so on. The World War II blokes, they had their welcome home parades and all that sort of business. And I mean, absolutely no disrespect here. It's just the difference in two wars. The Vietnam War was the most unpopular thing Australia's ever been involved in, even now. And that was the difference between the First War and the Second War and so on. It's as simple as that, from where I sit.
What personal experiences have you had with members of the general public? Does anything stick out in your head as the time that guy really rubbed you up the wrong way, or?
No, not off the top of my head. Only in social outings where you might be at a barbecue or something, and the missus will hear something and say, "Oh, come on, we'll just go home. We'll just wander off and just leave it at that." I've actually had verbal altercations with people who, on the road, they call it road rage, but it really wasn't. I just sort of let him have a verbal mouthful as I sort of went past him, but just that sort of stuff.
You'd have a altercation with someone who had said something to you, or?
Well, I'm a bit short-tempered, I suppose, but I hate people the thing that I hate the most is people will pull out in front of you from a side street, and you've got to stand on the brakes to stop from hitting them, and they'll go 100 yards up the road and turn off. Oh, that really gets up my nose. And I've abused a couple of them. Fortunately, they were blokes, because I wouldn't feel good about abusing a woman. But just things like that where you lose control a little bit, and then afterwards you get angry with yourself. You say, "Oh, bloody idiot, what did you do that for?" Just things like that. As far as the veteran thing, no, not. I just treat a lot of them with contempt, because I know that they probably haven't got a clue what they're talking about. The old Save Our Sons mob and all this sort of stuff. That just got out of control, I think, and then the wharfies got in and refused to send your gifts, and the posties wouldn't deliver your mail, and that's the sort of stuff that really annoyed me, because they were taking it out on us, not on the government, and it was the government that sent us there in the first place.
You didn't get to make the decisions, and you were just human beings waiting for your mail.
Yeah, and they weren't going to deliver it. They wouldn't even load the ships to bring our gifts over at Christmas time. Red Cross gifts, family gifts. We wrote letters home, or their wives wrote letters to Vietnam. They wouldn't deliver them. They just put them aside. So how good's that? Thank you very much. And that's what makes you mad. It's when, through no fault of your own, you're there doing what your country told you to do, and they won't provide the service they're paid to provide. Quite disgusting. Un-Australian.
Seems like you've given a lot to the army.
Oh, I haven't given as much as some people, but I enjoyed it. Would I change it again? I'd make a couple of changes. I wouldn't make a couple of the mistakes that I did.
Can you talk about those, or
yeah, sure. I mean, these are not. They don't concern anyone other than me. When I say that I would do a couple of things different, there comes a time when you're being promoted, when you sort of reach a level where you feel comfortable. I went past that level. If I had to do it again, I would have reached that level, and they say, "We're going to promote me." I said, "Shove it. I'm quite happy here." I really did get out of my depths a little bit.
What level was that?
I was promoted to sergeant, and I knew the job inside out and back to front. Then they promoted me to warrant officer, and I could do the job, but with a lot of difficulty. Well, I found it extremely hard. If I did it again, I would go as far as sergeant, and that's it. I would not go any further. But you can't undo it. That's something that I don't regret, but I realised that it was all becoming a bit too hard. And fortunately, I took my discharge before they decided to promote me any further. So that was a bit of a blessing in disguise, I think.
Has the army ever let you down?
Yes, they did. When I arrived here in Adelaide, my last job was with an Army Reserve unit. I didn't know at the time that it was my last job, but they sent me here, and it was normally for 2 years. And the two key people there, the two training staff, used to come and go at exactly the same time. So they asked me to stay on an extra 12 months, which would create a stagger. Somebody would be there every 12 months and always knew what was going on. And I did that because I just bought a house. So I said, that'll give me 12 months to settle into it and so forth. And they said, if you do that, when your promotion comes, we will look favourably on where you want to go. And I said, that's fine. I said, you can record it now. I want to go to Brisbane or Townsville. Either one, you have a choice of two. So they did that, but when the time came, they wanted to send me to Sydney. And I couldn't persuade them that this had been said and recorded, but the person who said it was no longer in that job. I just said, well, look, maybe his word still counts for something. He was a senior officer, and so no. I said, oh, well, you're not leaving me any choice. I'm going to take my discharge. Well, then they started, oh, don't be hasty, we need people with experience. But they weren't prepared to give me a choice of one or two. So I said, goodbye. That really disappointed me. And it was a bit of a sad way to end, because I started to become bitter towards the army because they didn't keep their word. And I said, you can shove it, I'm out. So I took my discharge.
That's the only time you feel they didn't keep their word?
Yeah, other than that, I can't think of anything that really made me get like that. No, that was about it.
So when you came back to Australia and you'd had some bad experiences, how many years were you still in the service for?
How long had I been in?
How long did you have to go? How long did you?
Oh, when did things start to come off the rails a little bit? Where was I? Can I remember any specific place? No, not really. I think probably, see, when you're still in the army, you've still got the big green family around you. You've got all the people who have got the same problems as you, but you talk, and you've got your own little network of psychiatrists or whatever, without knowing what. But you've got your own support group because they are still in the army the same as you. When you get out, all of a sudden you think, hey, this isn't quite so easy anymore. The people that I really feel sorry for are the national servicemen. They drag them out of their job for 2 years, they completely change their personality, send them away to do 12 months in a place like that with the risk of getting killed. They bring them out of the scrub today, and by midnight tonight they're back in Australia, and by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning they're discharged back into Civvy Street. Could you imagine that? They're the guys that I really feel for. They were just thrown out with no support, no nothing. At least the regular soldiers still had the army and their own, their mates to talk to. The national servicemen had bugger all. So I really think they did it the toughest of the whole damn lot for that reason. Interesting to talk to some of them and see how they feel.
Do you march?
Do I march on Anzac Day? Yes, I do. I've just joined a group and actually become the state secretary for a group called the National Malaysia and Borneo Veterans Association. Now, why did I do that? I am a member of the Vietnam Veterans Association as well, and up until now I always march with them. But I will not be marching with them in future. We found this people from Malaysia were the last of a pretty rare breed. Those that went and did service in Malaysia and Borneo, they came home and they just did what they had to do, and then they went back to work, did what they did, and that was fine. No whinging, no complaining. All right, it probably wasn't as dangerous as Vietnam, of course, but it was still, there was enough there. The Vietnam veterans, to my mind, they're bloody selfish, a lot of them. They want this, they want that, they should give me this, they should give me that. Well, the truth is, you get nothing for nothing. You've got to prove that you need it, prove that you're entitled to it, and I, quite frankly, and this is purely a personal view, am sick of hearing Vietnam veterans whinge. That's why I am going to take my allegiances back to a bunch of people that I served with, went through some good, bad times with and had a ball, and they don't complain. We get together and all we do is laugh. Now that's the best therapy I can think of. Have a couple of quiet beers and just laugh. No whinging about, oh, me pension this, me pension that, or I've got this and I've got that. That's me. That's the way it's going to be. And that was a reason for actually talking to the Mullion Creek mob, because I'd become familiar with the National Malaysia and Borneo people who gave me the piece of paper to talk to these guys. And I thought, well, if they're short of information on Malaysia, Borneo, if I can provide something, then why not? So that's why we're doing this.
What is it about the guys that went to Malaysia and Borneo?
I don't know. I think they're the last of a rare breed that just say, look, the government's told us to go here, do a job, we'll do that, we'll go home and shut up and get on with the next one. And that's it in a nutshell. Most of the people I talk to feel exactly the same way. We did it. We did it pretty well. It's all over and done with. We've done other things since, but nobody's whinging, nobody's complaining, we just laugh. As apart from some of the others who are still whinging and will continue to do so till the day they die. So I don't need that.
While it was an unpopular war, Vietnam,
Yep.
Malaysia was almost forgotten in some respects.
Yeah, that's true.
And yet you don't seem to show any animosity or seem that people...
No, it's just the breed of people that were there. I think that some of the people from Vietnam came home and they found that they could work the system, whereas the guys from Malaysia and Borneo weren't interested in working the system. I don't know why that should be. Perhaps because the Vietnam people were treated badly and they're seeing it as a way of getting back at the government. I think there's a lot of bitterness in them because of the way they were treated, whereas there's not that bitterness in the Malaysian and Borneo people. They're just quite happy to let it all go by, and they just do what they do.
Do any of the Malaysia Borneo people, to your knowledge, take their own lives?
No, not that I know of. No. In fact, I can say to you that I know nobody from the Malaysia-Borneo conflict that has taken their life. No.
And from the Vietnam conflict?
Oh, there's heaps of them, of course. I mean, it's well documented that at one stage, and this was a concern for me and my wife, that the children of Vietnam veterans had the highest suicide rate in Australia, and that scared the hell out of us. I don't know whether it's still the case because they're now not children anymore. They're sort of grown men and women. But that's a bit of a concern. It was.
Do you have any theories?
Any theories?
As to why that would be?
Probably living with her old man, seeing him as being a bit of a bloody lunatic. And some of them were quite harsh taskmasters, They were pretty rugged on their kids because of A, their military background, B, their illnesses, mental, psychological, all that stuff. So maybe the kids thought, they'd been belittled, or this is all supposition. I don't know, but perhaps all of that stuff.
Do you see yourself as a Borneo man or a Vietnam?
Principally, Malaysian Borneo first. The other lot can take care of itself, even though it's given me the shits at times. But no, Malaysia and Borneo first.
Listening to all that you've had to say, John, about Vietnam vets coming home, the circumstances in which that they came home to, what made that war so different? The World War II vets obviously were welcomed home, that's an obvious difference. But why do you think so many men came out of that war damaged human beings? Because
Australia, I think, was no longer prepared to kowtow and listen to America. I really believe that they thought we shouldn't have been in there in the first place. They had the misconception that we were dragged into the war by the American government, and we weren't. We now know that. And they were going to take it out on somebody. Now, instead of taking it out on the government, the easiest people to get at were the veterans themselves. When they were marching or doing whatever they were doing, and on it goes. And the old Save Our Sons, we know, I've heard all about those, I don't want to go into that. But that got a bit out of control. I think that became more than they originally intended it to be. And probably they're the reasons that have made people so bitter. The RSL wasn't good. I mean, the RSL wouldn't let Vietnam veterans in the door. That wasn't a war because there was no official declaration of war. And they wouldn't let them in. Now, most of the RSLs are run by Vietnam veterans because they need you, otherwise they're going to die. They're going to fold and all the clubs will go under. So the wheel goes round. Is it just that you were talking about many men who have been to Vietnam who ended up committing suicide? Mm-hmm. The suicide rate amongst their children you mentioned. Yeah. Was it only the public's reaction to Vietnam vets that caused so much damage to these men? Or were there other factors that made Vietnam a very different kind of a war? Oh, there certainly were other factors, and we still don't know about Agent Orange. I believe that's still got a lot to answer for. Who knows what it's done internally when you've been licking it, you've been drinking it for God knows how many years, and then all that defoliant stuff. And then, of course, there's the one that used to be known as battle fatigue, shell shock, and now it's called post-traumatic stress, which is probably a better name, because it can happen to anybody, not just veterans of wars. So that's probably a better name for it. And the effect that that has on the human being. I don't know, probably all of those things.
Did you come back a changed man?
I would have to say yes, because of the way that I used to treat my wife and family. And like I said before, she said it's like living with a block of ice. So yes, the answer to that is yes. For those reasons that we've just spoken about, I think, all of those. And the treatment and so on. And of course the old army machine, grown men don't cry. Well, that's a load of crap. But they build you up to be what you have to be to do that job. So they are responsible as well.
Absolutely. And perhaps being a block of ice is the best survival mechanism you had at the time.
It is exactly that. You try to shut everybody out and you can't do that. You're going to become a time bomb that's waiting to explode, and some of them do. Now maybe that explosion is I'll fix it all up and they take their life. Who knows? I don't. I just know that I'm one of the lucky ones.
I'd say so.
Yeah, I am. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And even though when times get rough and the storm clouds gather, they're going to go away. So you keep looking forward to that. And it seems to me that the good times are longer than the bad times. So what the hell? Let it go.
What are the good things the Army gave you?
What did they give me? They actually gave me a career, because like we said way back earlier, about 2 days ago, that I was a bit of a no-hoper. They straightened me out and they gave me, believe it or not, an education. I actually matriculated. So, and a solid future with really good superannuation benefits. And they've set me in a large sense where I am now. So who can complain?
Well, it seems
Not
like
me.
you're in a pretty good place to me.
I'm doing all right. I'm not complaining, and if it never gets any worse than this, I'll be happy.
Is there anything else you want to add, John?
Just the opportunity to do this because of the gap in the Malaysia, Borneo type stuff. I know we talked a lot about Vietnam, but that was that reason that made me want to do this, to fill in the history, and for no other reason. So we've done that, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
You did a very good, very precise history of your time in Borneo and Malaysia, and it will be invaluable. So thanks for your time, and thank you. It was a privilege to listen to your stories.
Oh, great. I enjoyed it.